In the heart of Texas hill country, hidden behind sagebrush and wild laurel, lies a ranch where white-tailed deer move like shadows and Turtle Creek hums a quiet melody. At its center stands a limestone estate, silent, strong, and soulful. This was Kris Kristofferson's refuge. Today, we step inside his sanctuary to uncover the music, the man, and the life of solitude he chose over stardom. But how did a military officer, once disowned by his own family, end up building a life so peaceful, so powerfully quiet? To understand that, we need to go back, before the fame, before the songs, back to Brownsville, Texas, where a restless spirit was born, one that would rewrite the rules of country music and walk away from everything to stay true to himself. He was born under the relentless sun of Brownsville, Texas, in the summer of 1936. Kris Kristofferson, a name that would one day echo through honky-tonks, vinyl grooves, movie screens, and the hearts of anyone who ever tried to live life on their own terms. But in the beginning, there was only discipline. His father was a high-ranking U.S. Air Force officer. Duty came before dreams, uniforms before guitars. The Kristoffersons moved from base to base, never quite planting roots. Eventually, they landed in California. But Kris, he was always elsewhere, in books, in ideas, in imagination. At Pomona College, he was more than a student. He was a scholar-athlete, a published writer, a man with both brains and brawn. He wrote essays that won awards and played football with bruised knees and a bleeding heart. Oxford came next. Yes, that Oxford, on a prestigious Rhodes Scholarship. He boxed. He played rugby. He studied English literature by day and wrote poetry by candlelight. But somewhere between Yeats and Hemingway, another voice emerged, his own. He picked up a guitar, scribbled lyrics in the margins of textbooks, sat in silence, staring out over the River Thames, wondering if he was meant for something else entirely. When he returned to America, that question still burned inside him. But before he could answer it, the military called, and this time he obeyed. Kris became a helicopter pilot, trained with special forces, served overseas. He earned the rank of captain and the respect of men twice his age. But even in uniform, he never stopped writing songs. And when the Army offered him a teaching position at West Point, he did the unthinkable. He said no. He chose music, and his family never forgave him for it. They cut him off, but he never looked back. Instead, he packed his guitar and a few dollars and drove straight to Nashville. The Music City didn't open its arms easily. He worked as a janitor at Columbia Recording Studios, sweeping floors where legends once stood. He flew helicopters by day and dropped off demo tapes by night. He even landed a chopper in Johnny Cash's backyard just to get noticed. Crazy? Maybe, but it worked. Eventually, Cash listened to one of his tapes, and when he sang "Sunday Morning Comin' Down," something changed. A door opened, not wide, but just enough. What followed wasn't a meteoric rise. It was a long, hungry climb. His songs, rough, honest, painful, found their way into the voices of others. Jerry Lee Lewis, Roy Drusky, Janis Joplin, even Elvis. And then, finally, his own. In 1971, he released The Silver-Tongued Devil and I. It wasn't just a title, it was a confession. Kris Kristofferson didn't want to be a star. He wanted to be real. And somehow, that made him unforgettable. So how does a man go from Oxford scholar to janitor, from soldier to songwriter, and finally to icon? The answer lies not just in his music, but in the spaces he retreated to when the noise became too loud. The places where he could still hear his own voice. And there's no better example of that than the estate he built in the heart of Texas hill country. Ranch in Texas. Just a short drive from Fredericksburg and Bourne, nestled deep in the limestone folds of Texas hill country, sits a property that doesn't scream for attention. It whispers. And that's exactly how Kris Kristofferson liked it. This wasn't a mansion built to impress guests or flaunt wealth. It was a retreat carved from stone and silence, made to echo back the rhythm of the land and the soul of the man who called it home. Welcome to Kristofferson's Texas Ranch, a $12 million, 172-acre estate wrapped in nature's own cathedral, where deer roam freely, the wind carries old lyrics through oak trees, and Turtle Creek snakes through the middle like a sacred lifeline. Before you even see the house, you feel it. The scent of mountain laurel and sagebrush hangs thick in the air. The long paved driveway winds like a melody, pulling you through high fenced pastures filled with axis deer, blackbuck antelope, and even Grant's zebras grazing under the Texas sun. Yes, zebras. Because Kris wasn't interested in convention. He was interested in wonder, and every inch of this land delivers just that. But then you arrive at the heart of it all. A 2-story, 7,628 square foot limestone home that doesn't sit on the land, it belongs to it. Built with natural stone and traditional plaster, the house exudes strength without arrogance. It's Texas, but it's also timeless. Inside, the first thing you notice is the warmth, not just from the 4 handcrafted fireplaces, but from the reclaimed longleaf pine floors, salvaged from historic buildings in San Antonio. They creak with stories. The ceilings soar above you. Archways of solid stone connect living spaces in an open embrace. Sunlight floods through imported old-world doors, and everywhere you look, there's a detail that tells you this wasn't built for style. It was built for meaning. In the formal dining room, cypress wood paneling, carved by a local artisan, wraps the walls like a folk song, turned physical. Behind it, a hidden butler's pantry, with warming drawers, prep space, and a sonic ice machine, cleverly tucked away so the magic of hosting never breaks stride. The kitchen is a chef's dream, but also a poet's. 3-inch poured concrete countertops, Viking and Sub-Zero appliances, a built-in bar that can be open for laughter or closed for solitude. Because solitude, here, is sacred. Downstairs, 2 master suites offer quiet escapes, each with fireplaces, spa-like baths, and walk-in closets built not for red carpets, but for comfort. Upstairs, 2 more guest bedrooms and a secondary living area open onto a 2,000 square foot Saltillo tiled terrace with a wood-burning fireplace and views of the creek below. You can almost hear a guitar strumming in the background. Step outside, and the world opens wider. A private courtyard with a French-style fountain offers meditation in motion. A fire pit glows orange against twilight skies. There's even a 1,396 square foot pool house with a heated indoor pool and hot tub deck overlooking Turtle Creek. Here, everything flows. Everything breathes. Even the land itself participates in the rhythm. Half of it high-fenced to house exotic wildlife, the other half open to native deer, wild ducks, and geese. A 3-acre lake shimmers beside 2 stone piers. Underground, a 6,000-gallon water system hums silently, feeding wells and fountains. Every system works in harmony, like the verses of a great song. But perhaps the most magical part, it isn't the design or the luxury, it's that this entire space was made for a man who had nothing left to prove. A man who turned down Hollywood dinners for firelight on a back porch, who swapped spotlights for starlight, who built a world not to impress others, but to reconnect with the quiet voice that first led him to a guitar all those decades ago. This was no trophy property. It was shelter for a soul that had weathered wars, walked away from fame, and still believed that the land, raw, untamed, honest, was the best place to heal. So where did Kris go when Texas got too loud and he needed to vanish completely? Let's follow the road west, toward the sea, the cliffs, and a second sanctuary that feels like the edge of the world. Ranch in Northern California. If Texas was where Kris Kristofferson grounded his soul, then Northern California was where he let it drift. Far from the open plains and glowing fire pits of hill country, his second sanctuary stood in stark contrast, wild, windswept, and perched on the edge of the world. 557 acres of untamed coastline, 1 mile of private Pacific shoreline, and a horizon so infinite it felt like it could swallow your past whole. This was Elk, California, 3 hours north of San Francisco and 1,000,000 miles from anywhere else. Tucked between ancient redwood forests and the roaring cliffs of Mendocino, this coastal ranch wasn't designed to host parties. It was designed to disappear. Here, nature dictated the rhythm. Fog rolled in like whispered confessions. Salt-laced air clung to weathered barn doors, and the only soundtrack was the crash of waves against Devil's Basin, the dramatic cliffside hollow that once starred in Hollywood films, now standing silent under Kris's watch. The land itself felt cinematic. Grassy meadows unfolded like pages of forgotten manuscripts. Gnarled trees reached toward skies heavy with memory, and narrow dirt paths curved toward the shoreline as if leading to some quiet revelation. At the heart of it all stood history. 19th century dairy barns still held the scent of old wood and stories untold. Stone foundations, softened by moss and sea wind, reminded visitors that this was a place where generations had come to work the land. And now, one man had come to be still with it. There were no manicured gardens here, no grand fountains or glittering chandeliers, just the simplicity of earth, sky, and sea. And yet, this estate was valued at over $17 million. Because how do you price solitude? How do you measure the worth of a place that offers no cell signal, no distractions, only the sound of your thoughts and the space to listen? Though rarely photographed, whispers from those who visited described it as Kris's true hiding place. A place where he'd retreat to write, pen scratching against paper, coffee cooling beside him, lyrics floating out across the Pacific. Some say this is where Feeling Mortal was born. Others say it was never about music at all, that this was where he came to stop being Kris Kristofferson the icon and simply exist as Kris the man. And yet, just a short drive away from this windswept isolation, a small village with a restaurant that held 2 Michelin stars, because even in seclusion, Kris had taste. But he never needed fanfare, no red carpets, no entourages, just a wide-brim hat, a flannel shirt, and the ocean mist on his face. It's telling that the 2 homes he loved most, Texas and Elk, shared one key trait: freedom. Not just physical space, but emotional space, psychological space, places where time slowed, expectations dissolved, and he could once again hear the silence between notes. And maybe that's why these 2 homes were so important, because for a man who gave the world so many words, he spent his final years searching for the one thing most of us never find: quiet. But how does a man afford 2 estates worth millions, a music career spanning decades, and the luxury of walking away from it all? The answer lies not in the homes, but in the songs that built them. Let's talk about the money, the royalties, and the quiet fortune that followed him like a shadow. Kris Kristofferson never chased money, but somehow it found him anyway. Perhaps because he never treated success like a finish line. He treated it like a byproduct of honesty, of art, of risking everything for a song only he could hear. And that risk paid off. Today, his net worth is estimated at $50 million. But the story behind that figure, it's far more compelling than any spreadsheet. It started, humbly, with one demo tape. One song, Sunday Morning Comin' Down, landed in Johnny Cash's hands and changed everything. When Cash recorded it, the royalties began to trickle in, slowly at first, then like a flood. That one song became a spiritual anthem for lost souls and Sunday drifters, and it opened the floodgates for what would become one of the most lucrative catalogs in country music history. By the 1970s, Kristofferson's songwriting was everywhere. Help Me Make It Through the Night, recorded by Sammy Smith, became a crossover smash. Me and Bobby McGee, immortalized by Janis Joplin, became a posthumous #1 hit. Each recording, another stream of income. Each radio play, another royalty check. And these weren't just hits, they were standards. Songs that kept playing in diners, jukeboxes, country bars, film soundtracks, and late-night memories. But Kris didn't stop at writing. He performed, he toured, and eventually, he acted. From A Star Is Born to Blade, his film appearances didn't just expand his audience, they expanded his earnings. Major studio contracts, residuals, and back-end points added millions to his growing fortune. By the late 80s, he had become not just a songwriter and singer, but a brand. His work with the Highwaymen, alongside Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash, and Waylon Jennings, brought in record sales, concert tours, and cultural capital that no dollar sign could fully measure. Yet despite the wealth, he never flaunted it. He didn't collect rare watches or build mega mansions in Beverly Hills. Instead, he bought land. He invested in peace. To him, money wasn't power, it was protection, a way to shield himself from the noise, a way to say no when others would have said yes, a way to give his family the freedom he once had to fight for. So yes, Kris Kristofferson made millions, but what he really earned was the ability to walk away from fame, from Hollywood, even from Nashville when it became too much. Because when the world called him a legend, he answered with silence, and let his song speak louder than any bank account ever could. And what did he do with all that freedom? He gave it away, not in interviews or award shows, but in something far more powerful, acts of kindness that never asked for headlines. Philanthropy. Before Kris Kristofferson ever stood on a stage or faced a film camera, he was already thinking about justice, about the ones who had no voice, the workers bent beneath fields of heat, the children caught in wars they didn't start, the migrants walking toward hope with nothing in their pockets but faith. And maybe that's what made his philanthropy different. It wasn't about charity, it was about solidarity. One of his earliest and most powerful acts of giving, standing shoulder to shoulder with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, supporting the United Farm Workers, UFFW, not just with his name, but with his presence. He sang at benefit concerts for UFFW, not to be applauded, but to uplift, to tell stories in melody that the headlines had forgotten. In an industry obsessed with glamour, Kris chose to stand in dusty fields, in union halls, on makeshift stages where people cried more than they clapped, because that's where he felt most useful. Then came the children. In 1979, he joined the Music for UNICEF concert, an ambitious global broadcast hosted by the United Nations. While others came to perform, Kris came to give. Every dollar raised went toward fighting child hunger and supporting vulnerable communities across the globe. He didn't stop there. In Ireland, in his later years, he quietly donated all proceeds from select shows to children's charities. No press release, no fanfare. Just a man doing what felt right. He also supported War Child, a nonprofit dedicated to helping children affected by conflict zones. When asked why, his answer was simple: because they didn't choose this. But perhaps his most poetic act of giving came through a song, One Day at a Time, a gospel-like ballad of hope, patience, and divine trust. It became an anthem for immigrants across the Americas. Its Spanish version, Un Día a la Vez, was embraced by churches, communities, and families making impossible journeys toward a better life. It wasn't just a hit, it was a prayer. And for many walking desert roads or boarding buses in silence, it was the only song they knew by heart. Kris also stood up for the underrepresented in politics. He opposed American military interventions in the Gulf, Panama, and Nicaragua. He condemned apartheid in South Africa. He performed at a fundraiser for Leonard Peltier, a controversial Native American activist. He even campaigned for Jesse Jackson in 1988 and Ross Perot in 1992, not because they were popular, but because they spoke to people the system ignored. And when he sang at a benefit for Palestinian children, despite public backlash, it was because he believed suffering anywhere mattered everywhere. He didn't care who approved, he cared who was hurting. In the end, Kris didn't give to build his brand. He gave to soften the world. One lyric, one performance, one quiet check at a time. His life wasn't just about creating art, it was about making space for others to survive. But behind all the giving, the music, and the escapes into wilderness, who was Kris Kristofferson at home? What did his personal life look like when the stage lights dimmed and the songs faded into silence? Personal life. Fame introduced him to millions. But love? That was far more elusive. Kris Kristofferson, the man who gave the world some of its most intimate lyrics, lived a personal life marked by yearning, heartbreak, and finally, peace. It wasn't a straight road. It never is for men who feel too deeply. In 1961, Kris married his college sweetheart, Frances Mavia Beer. They were young, he was still in uniform, and the world hadn't yet cracked open with music. But as the songs started pouring out, the marriage began to erode. By the time he found his footing in Nashville, their love had already slipped through the cracks. They divorced in 1969, just as his career was beginning to shine. Not long after, he shared a brief, passionate connection with Janis Joplin. It wasn't long enough to become a love story, but long enough to leave a mark. And when she passed away in 1970, Kris was left with a void he didn't know how to name. He never liked talking about it, but he never stopped feeling it either. Then came Rita Coolidge. They were two stars orbiting the same emotional sun, equally bright, equally fragile. Married in 1973, their union seemed golden on the outside. Magazine covers, red carpets, award shows. But behind the camera flashes, things weren't so simple. The pressures of fame, the expectations, the silence that sometimes falls between two people who once shared everything. By 1980, they had divorced, and Kris, once again, was alone. Until Lisa Myers walked in, a law student with grace, strength, and an ability to see through the spotlight, not just into it. They married in 1983, and this time, Kris didn't just find a partner, he found an anchor. Together they raised 5 children, adding to the 3 from his previous marriages, making Kris a father of 8. Their family became his grounding force. No longer the wandering troubadour, chasing meaning on back roads and bar stages, Kris began to slow down, not retire, just soften. They split their time between a peaceful home in Malibu's Las Flores Canyon and an even more remote property in Hana, Hawaii. In Hana, the ocean was louder than any city noise. The wind moved through the trees like an old friend. There were no paparazzi, no red carpets, only sunrise walks, handwritten letters, and music created for no one but himself. Here, he played with his kids, read in hammocks, took off his shoes, and reconnected with the land. Here, he healed. In 2016, Kris revealed he had been battling a series of misdiagnosed health issues. For years, doctors had told him it was Alzheimer's, then Lyme disease, then something else. It was hard. There were moments when his memory faltered, when his lyrics danced just out of reach. But even then, he kept going. He kept singing, sometimes on smaller stages, sometimes just to family. Because for Kris, music was never about performance. It was about truth. And you don't stop telling the truth just because fewer people are listening. Toward the end of his life, he was surrounded not by flashing cameras, but by love. A quiet kind. The kind that doesn't demand anything. The kind that simply stays. So who was Kris Kristofferson when the lights went down? A man of deep conviction, of gentle rebellion, of endless contradictions that somehow made perfect sense. He was the fighter who hated war, the poet who could throw a punch, the superstar who chose a dirt road over a limousine, and in the end, he found what so few do in a lifetime of noise: peace. But the story doesn't end with the silence. Because even now, even in absence, his voice still lingers in hotel bars, desert highways, and worn-out vinyl records. And in our final chapter, we'll revisit the lyrics and the legacy that will outlive us all. Not every man leaves behind monuments. Some leave behind melodies. And Kris Kristofferson? He left an entire generation humming words they didn't even know he wrote. His lyrics didn't just sit on pages or ride radio waves. They lived in the empty bottles of roadside bars, the tears of soldiers returning home, and the whispered prayers of anyone who ever tried to make it through one more night. Because Kris didn't write songs to impress. He wrote them to survive. Sunday Morning Comin' Down, a ballad of despair so raw that even Johnny Cash said it shook him to his core. It wasn't just a hit, it was a confession, a sermon for the lonely, a window into a world where regret sleeps in late and salvation is just out of reach. And it changed everything. Not just for Kris, but for country music itself. Help me make it through the night. A plea, a surrender, a moment of human weakness turned into poetry. Sammy Smith took it to #1, but it was Kris who had the courage to write a song that stripped away pretense and embraced vulnerability. In a genre known for toughness and bravado, Kris offered softness, yearning, honesty, and people listened because he wasn't singing at them. He was singing with them. Me and Bobby McGee, a freedom song wrapped in heartbreak, immortalized by Janis Joplin, released after her death and forever linked to both their legacies. There's a line, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose, that has outlived them both. It's been tattooed on skin, scribbled in journals, echoed in movie scenes, and whispered by those standing on the edge of reinvention. Few songwriters ever write a lyric that becomes cultural scripture. Kris did it in his sleep. But it wasn't just the hits, it was the hidden gems. The Pilgrim, chapter 33. For the good times. Why me, Lord? Songs that bled truth, that walked with the broken, that dared to ask spiritual questions without needing answers. Kris never tried to be perfect. He just tried to be real. And that's why the songs still matter. His lyrics didn't age. They aged with us. They sat in our living rooms on quiet Sundays. They rode shotgun on lonely drives. They filled the silence after goodbyes, and now they float somewhere between memory and myth, still there, still true, still him. You can study his life, his film roles, his awards, but none of it will tell you who he really was. Only the lyrics will, because Kris Kristofferson didn't just write songs, he etched pieces of his soul into melody, and every time someone sings his words, he comes back to life for just a moment more. But what does it all mean? The ranches, the fame, the exile, the return. When a man walks away from everything we're taught to chase, what does he leave behind? That's where we go next. Let's close this story the way he would have wanted. Not with noise, but with reflection. If a line from Kris Kristofferson ever stayed with you, if a melody of his ever found you in a moment of silence, then this isn't just the story of a country legend. It's a piece of your own. Leave us a comment. Tell us which Kris song lives rent-free in your heart. Was it Sunday Morning Coming Down? Help Me Make It Through the Night? Or maybe something you found by accident and never forgot? And if you believe stories like his deserve to be remembered, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more journeys into the lives behind the lyrics. Because sometimes, the quietest voices echo the longest.